Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Lost Planeswalker. You are here with me, Jesse, The Lost Planeswalker. And today we are going to talk about the Blame Game Commander deck that just came out in the Murder at Karlov Manor set. This is a super fun deck, and this is a super cool upgrade guide that's going to talk about the cards I think you should include and disregard that they were included in this deck, as well as talk about some of the new cards very briefly. But let me just start out by saying that the Blame Game deck is a very, very cool new take on Boros that features the new keyword Suspect, and a suspected creature has menace but can no longer block. So to start out, let's look at the two commanders that come in this deck, and we have Nelly Borka, Impulsive Accuser, and Feather, Radiant Arbiter. Now, two fun things here. Feather is a awesome card, and the first version of Feather is very oppressive, and this one is also pretty strong in my opinion. But Nelly Borka is named after Bell Borka, who is another cool character from Ravnica, his daughter here. So this is an awesome deck, awesome flavor text. But let's start out by reading Nelly Borka, Impulsive Accuser. Legendary creature, human detective with vigilance. When Nelly Borka, Impulsive Accuser attacks, suspect target creature, then goad all suspected creatures. So this is great because whether it's through Nelly or through another card effect, giving suspect to your opponent's creatures are going to make it so they have to attack. In addition, you're also giving them some evasion, which makes it actually really powerful. Then, whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls deal combat damage to one or more of your opponents, you and the controller of those creatures each draw a card. So it is benefit. Your opponents are going to want to attack because they get to draw cards, and you also get to draw cards, which is an awesome effect for Boros because Boros is not particularly known as the color pair that can draw the most cards, so this is a great card to include. So next up, the co-commander of this deck is Feather, Radiant Arbiter. Legendary creature angel, flying in lifelink. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell that only targets Feather, Radiant Arbiter, you may choose any number of other creatures that spell could target and pay 2 for each of those creatures. If you do, for each of those creatures, copy that spell. The copy targets that creature. So basically what you're doing here is any non-creature spell you cast that targets Feather, you get to make multiple of and target a bunch of creatures with. Whether that's a benefit for you or a negative for your opponents, this is an awesome effect. Now, I would like to call out that the way I'm building this deck is not based around Feather, because I think the amount of cards they include in this deck that really work for her are not as many as Nelly Borka. So that should be an entirely separate deck. I probably won't be doing that, but just keep that in mind that any sort of aura enchantment or spell or something that targets her that could also target your opponent's stuff to make it, maybe they're goated, maybe they get big but can't attack you, is all really cool effects, but don't really work in this deck. So when we get to the cards removed section, you'll see I pretty much took out any card related to that. But let's look at some of those new cards real quick and talk about them because they are great and actually quite expensive. There's a couple of them that are definitely worth their weight. So first off, we have Havoc Eater, Hot Pursuit, and Immortal Obligation. So Havoc Eater is a great card that goads a creature each opponent controls, and then you put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the power of those creatures goaded. So this could be an incredibly large creature, goading your opponents, maybe their biggest creatures, making this very hard to block. But in addition, this has flying, which is a great evasion spell, but for 7 mana, yeah, it better do something that good because I don't want to pay 7 mana and then not get any good benefit out of it. Hot Pursuit, on the other hand, is 1 in red enchantment. When Hot Pursuit enters the battlefield, suspect target creature an opponent controls. As long as Hot Pursuit remains on the battlefield, that creature is goaded. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if 2 or more players have lost the game, gain control of all goaded or suspected creatures until end of turn. Untap them, and they gain haste until end of turn. This is an awesome card in a Kingmaker strategy, specifically because goad means your opponents have to attack, and if you're not set up to be able to deal with those creatures that you've goaded, you're probably going to lose. So Hot Pursuit just makes it so on your turn, guess what? You get to grab all of those creatures and swing in and hit your opponent with them. And with Nelly Borka, doing that every turn, suspecting more and more creatures, you're going to just be able to take their entire board and hit them right back with it. And Immortal Obligation is an instant that says return target creature card from an opponent's graveyard to the battlefield under their control with a duty counter on it. For as long as that creature has a duty counter on it, it is goated, can't attack you or permanents you control, and can't block creatures you control, which is a super cool effect because maybe you can work with an opponent. Maybe they have something big in their graveyard and you say, hey, just swing in and hit, this guy instead. This is actually a really cool effect and can definitely prove worthwhile. But next up, we have Mob Verdict, Otherworldly Escort, and Prisoner's Dilemma. Mob Verdict has a secret council that says each player secretly votes for another player. Then those votes are revealed. For each vote an opponent received, Mob Verdict deals 2 damage to that player and each creature that player controls. And then for each vote you receive, you draw a card. So maybe your opponents don't want to target each other. Well, you get to draw a bunch of cards. Or if your opponent has a bunch of 1/1s or 2/2s on the board and you want to get rid of them, you can just choose them. This is a very versatile card that's going to prove to be probably pretty good. Otherworldly S has Flash. When it dies, if it's not a spirit, return to the battlefield with a charge counter on it, and it is a spirit detective. Then for 1 and a white, remove a charge counter from Otherworldly Escort, destroy target creature that was dealt damage to you this turn. And then Prisoner's Dilemma, probably one of my favorite cards, and you've probably heard it already from other people because it's so unique. Each opponent secretly chooses Silence or Snitch. Then the choices are revealed. If each opponent chooses Silence, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 4 damage to each of them. If each opponent chooses Snitch, Prisoner's Dilemma deals each damage to each of them. Otherwise, Prisoner's Dilemma deals 12 damage to each opponent who chose Silence. So if you're trying to be nice and you just want to take 4 all around, well, you can choose Silence. But if one player wants to get ahead of everybody else, anybody voted for Silence while they voted for Snitch gets dealt 12 damage. But if everybody wants to be mean and be the Snitch, they each take 8. So a very, very cool card that is probably going to be pretty good, actually. I think it's going to be... I don't think you can expect to know what people are going to say. So then we have Ransom Note, Redemption Arc, and Take the Bait. Ransom Note is a new clue artifact in every deck, and this says when it enters, you surveil 1, then 2 sack it, and either cloak the top card of your library, goad target creature, or draw a card. Redemption Arc is an aura enchantment that says enchanted creature has indestructible and is goaded. Then for 1 and a white, you can exile enchanted creature. Maybe it gets later in the game and it's just down to you and an opponent and you don't like that creature anymore. Well, you can just pay 1 and a white to exile it, which is an awesome effect to have. And Take the Bait says cast a spell only during an opponent's turn and only during combat. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn. Untap all attacking creatures and goad them. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So this is a cool effect because either you are getting down to the end of the game and you want to take all your opponent's stuff and swing into another opponent, or you can kind of use this as an expensive fog spell. It'll work, and just make it so all of your opponent's stuff is tapped and can't attack you. It is a great effect, and I am very glad to see another one of these cards out there. In the cash cow in this deck, the very, very expensive new card is Trouble in Pairs. 2 white enchantment. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Then, whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card, which is great because you can potentially draw 3 cards on each opponent's turn for a total of 9 cards every round of combat, which is incredible, especially in white. This is probably one of the peak white cards, and you are going to see this played a lot. So maybe pick up a copy for yourself before it gets too expensive. So now let's briefly talk about the cards that want to be removed from this deck. They just don't fit in, or I'm just a little confused on why they're in here to begin with. So starting out, we have Feather, Radiant Arbiter, Felwar Stone, and Care Keep. Feather, like I mentioned earlier, is all about putting stuff on your opponent's creatures, and you can also put them on Feather, but this deck is not built for that. I would put a lot more mana rocks in this deck because you want to be able to pay that extra cost for every spell, and so it's just not a great fit. Felwar Stone, notably, I am removing just because this is a 2-color deck. Yeah, you're probably playing with people at the table who are also playing colors in your color identity, but it's just not worth it in my opinion. And then Care Keep, just, I don't know what you're doing with those kobold creature tokens. In my opinion, I don't really see any benefit to making them. I know why they're in this deck. You're not really a creature token based deck, so I don't know why this is in here to begin with. Next up, we have Martial Impetus, Mind Stone, and Scavenging Grounds. Martial Impetus is one of the enchantment auras I would definitely include if I was building Feather Radiant Arbiter, but because we're not, I don't really see a point. In addition, this does buff up all of your opponent's stuff if they're attacking an opponent, but I really don't want to be able to make that a threat against ourselves, which it can't be, but it's just not really worth it for me. Mind Stone, another mana rock. You have enough card draw in this deck. I really don't see you paying 2 mana to then pay an additional mana to sack this to draw a card at some point being very good at all. And then Scavenger Grounds is a desert that says sack a desert, exile all graveyards. Yeah, you can include this if you want. I just really didn't see the point. Maybe you're worried against one of your opponents who are playing graveyard decks. Yeah, leave this in. I just don't like it. Next up, we have Throne of the High City, Vow of Duty, and Vow of Lightning. Throne of the High City introduces Monarch to the game, which is great, except you're basically paying 5 mana to become the Monarch, which isn't good, and there are no other effects in this deck that really get you the Monarch back. I guess if you suspect creatures, it's harder for your opponents to block, but I really don't see this being that powerful or good, honestly. Vow of Duty and Vow of Lightning are very similar. Each creature gets +2/+2, they get Vigilance or First Strike, and can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. It's good, but it doesn't make it so they have to attack. You know, this would be great in a Feather deck at the end game, you know, making it so basically they can't attack, and you're paying actually a good amount of mana to do that, but I really don't see a good use for those cards. And lastly, we have War Room and Winds of Wrath that I'm excluding from this deck. Like I said already, you have a really good draw engine with Nelly Borka. I don't really see War Room being that good, especially because you're paying 3 and then 2 life to draw a card. It's really not worth it. You have a good amount of card draw in this deck already. And then Winds of Wrath that just destroys all enchanted creatures. They can't be regenerated. This is not great, honestly, if you're playing a Feather deck, because you're probably enchanting all of your opponent's stuff. And then just making it so your own board gets wiped is not super good, and they can't be regenerated, which doesn't matter, but I just don't like this board wipe in this deck at all. So looking at what cards you should add in this deck is really focusing around those goat effects, because you want to goat as many creatures as you can to get your opponents attacking everybody but you. So starting out, we have Aurelia the Law Above, Baloth, Barati Entertainer, and then Bothersome Quasit. Aurelia the Law Above is sort of the exception here, but she works so well because whenever a player attacks with 3 or more creatures, you draw a card. Then whenever a player attacks with 5 or more creatures, this deals 3 damage to each opponent and you gain 3 life. I love this card and this effect specifically because you're going to be forcing your opponents to attack, so you're going to be getting an extra card draw on top of Nelly Borka's card draw, which is really powerful. Baloth here says creatures your opponents control with power less than his power is goated. And then whenever a goated attacking or blocking creature dies, you create a treasure token. I love this effect. I love Baloth. You know, I wish there was better ways in this deck to give him more power to be able to make your opponents attack with more stuff, but if they have a token-based deck, they're just going to be forced to attack with all those tokens pretty much, and that's going to be great for you. And then Bothersome Quasit has Menace. Goaded creatures your opponent's control can't block, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, goad target creature an opponent controls. For the most part, you are going to be playing this card just to make it so your opponent's goaded creatures can't block, because that makes them very, very vulnerable, especially the more things you goad. So that becomes very good. Next up, we have Coordination of Chaos, Geode Ranger, and Laser Screwdriver. Coordination of Chaos is a sorcery that says up to 3 target creatures can't block this turn, and you goad them. I think for 1 mana each, that seems pretty fair. In addition, Geode Ranger has Landfall, and whenever a land enters the battlefield, you goad each creature target player controls, which seems extremely, extremely powerful. It is 6 mana to cast, but being able to goad your entire opponent's board just for playing a land seems absurd. And Laser Screwdriver has all the other benefits of add 1 mana of any color, tap, target artifact, surveil 1, but notably goad target creature. Next up, we have Life of the Party, Manifold Key, and Popular Entertainer. Life of the Party has First Strike, Trample, and Haste, and whenever it attacks, it gets +X, +0 until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Then, when Life of the Party enters the battlefield, if it's not a token, each opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. The tokens are goaded for the rest of the game. Just giving your opponent a giant goaded creature that gets really big if they have a ton of creatures seems pretty good to me. Manifold Key, 1 mana, 1 tap, untap target artifact, 3 tap, target creature can't be blocked this turn is great, especially if you are giving your opponent a huge thing to swing in with, and you can just make it so that creature can't be blocked. Or use it on one of your own creatures when you're attacking them. And then Popular Entertainer is a legendary creature background. Popular Entertainer is a legendary enchantment background. Commander creatures you own have, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, goad target creature that player controls. Just another way that you're going to be able to goad your opponent's stuff, and it's going to be great. And the last two cards I think you should include are Taunt from the Ramparts and Whisper Silk Cloak. Taunt from the Ramparts says goad all creatures your opponents control until your next turn. Those creatures can't block. Just another great thing we want to do. And then Whisper Silk Cloak is a artifact equipment with equipped creatures, can't be blocked, and has Shroud. Because Nelly Borka's attacking, not necessarily we want her to not be able to be blocked, but just more or less make it so she can't be interacted with by your opponent's stuff or any spells. This is just a great protection piece that I think is necessary in this deck because I didn't see too many other ones in here. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you got some inspiration for this deck. Maybe some of the stuff I was saying, made some sense. Maybe it didn't, but I would love to hope it did. Also, if you consider leaving a comment, what's a card that you think I should include? I would really, really appreciate it. But I hope you liked this. Please subscribe, share this video with a friend, leave a like, do all that fun stuff. That would really help me out. And now let's say today's Scryfall card of the day, which is Fractured Identities, particularly from the Doctor Who set. And it says, it's like I'm breaking into a million pieces and there's only one thing I remember. I have to save the Doctor. Clara Oswald. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.